So good morning, good afternoon, and for some people, good evening, everybody. Welcome to this webinar. I'm the CEO of NineSigma Europe. My name is Rick Wielands. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us during this webinar. And this webinar is going to be about Open Innovation, the 30 Minutes How-To Guide. It's a series of webinars that we've been running for the last couple of months. It's great to see a lot of people joining us today again. And the webinar series is especially for you, the corporate innovator, to learn, let's say, from the different case studies from each other. In most of the webinar series, we have a lot of clients talking. Today, we have a bit of a different topic on the webinar. The topic of today is around the innovation contest and the implementation of innovation. And I'm really excited to have with me this afternoon our very own expert on contest and grand challenges, Denys Resnick, who is bright and early in Cleveland this morning with us. So, Denys, welcome to the webinar.
Thank you, Rick. Glad to be here.
Let me give you a few accolades so that people have a bit more background on what you do within our group in Cleveland and in the global programs, and so that people know your role. So Denys is actually heading up our strategic program team. She's our VP Strategic Programs and responsible for, amongst others, the very visible ones, like the one behind me, the Cisco Security Challenge, and a number of other grand challenges that we're running for companies like General Electric and obviously Cisco, the CCMC organization in Canada and Alberta, and UnderArmour. The big programs are something that we've been starting to do for the last couple of years. I think it's highly inspiring and great to have Denys on board for this webinar series and to share a few insights of these things. So perhaps, Denys, to start off the topic, we're talking about the implementation of innovation as that's the core theme of what we're discussing, and how innovation contests are related to that. But could you tell me a bit about where this focus with implementation of innovation is coming from?
Sure. When we talk about innovation, maybe it'd be good to step back a little bit and look over maybe the past decade. NineSigma, when we started in the year 2000, when we talked about innovation, people didn't really necessarily know what we were talking about. The concept of open innovation hadn't even been coined yet. And so, in the early years, companies were even reluctant to be public about the fact that they were going outside their organization to find new technology and new partners, and were a little concerned about letting people know that they didn't have all the knowledge within their own organization. But as the concept of open innovation became more accepted, we've seen a really interesting transition. One thing I was sharing with Rick was that last week I was participating at a conference for chief innovation officers. 5 years ago there wouldn't have been enough people to fill a room, and here were hundreds of individuals who had that title and who were seeking to innovate internally in their organization to unleash the power of sharing and collaborative thinking, collaborative problem solving within their own organization. So that's one part of the implementation. And then the other part of implementation, which would be executing outside of their organization, bringing outsiders or unknown partners into the organization who bring specific knowledge. So, whereas in the olden days, long time ago, maybe 8 years ago, people were secretive about being innovative. We see now instead that innovation is a point on every single CEO's agenda, and that in fact individuals at the corporate level are being tasked with innovating their organizations. So that implementation has really moved to front and center.
Okay. So I'm hearing a couple of things that you're mentioning. One of the things is it looks like a bit is from under this radar kind of perspective moving into the very visible domain. And one of the first things that pop up with me, to me, is always the question that I get: is open innovation always open? The whole kind of IP discussion. That might be a topic to then briefly touch upon. And the other thing that jumps to mind is that when you're under the radar, then the results, they're not that visible, also not to the outside world. Is that one of the key differences that you see, that it's becoming more visible, and that also the results of the outside world are becoming more visible?
Sure. So let me touch on this concept of IP first, because obviously that's something that we get asked all the time. Um, Again, if we look at more traditional perspectives towards IP in the corporate environment, IP was something that you collected. It became kind of the archive, but perhaps the treasure chest of an organization. And I think that a lot of organizations recognize, first of all, that the cost of maintaining IP is quite expensive. And any large corporation you talk to will tell you that they have hundreds and hundreds of patents that they don't use. So the maintenance of this archive of IP that's not alive in the organization is not very valuable. So unleashing that IP is really the piece that makes it valuable. And so many large corporations, in fact, become solvers in an open innovation environment because they have IP that they're not using and that they're interested in sharing. And so sharing becomes the operative word in an open innovation environment. It's not necessarily about owning the IP, it's about the rights to use. And so again, lots of corporations are recognizing, both small and large, that collaborating in order to leverage IP is significantly more important than actually owning the IP, because many times the technology is applicable in many different markets. So the key is having an application and rights to use in a competitively advantageous way within your own marketplace, but perhaps letting that technology live in another marketplace that may not be adjacent in any way.
Okay, it's an interesting perspective, this access over ownership perspective. But I was also hearing something else, and that is that you were talking more about a different kind of sponsorship and involvement from executives. You said, it's not a nice to have anymore. Let's say innovation is not even about open innovation, but about innovation in general becoming a center and fronter at a lot of organizations. Does that change the kind of sponsorship that you see in these kind of programs from clients?
Yeah, and so that's really why innovation contests is something that for us is very exciting, and also is growing at a very fast pace. Because when a CEO stands up in front of an executive team and say, okay, we want to do innovation, let's go. The question is, well, what are the tools in my tool chest to make that happen? And so, again, going back to that CEO's objective, they have multiple objectives. One of the objectives, and again, looking at it from a bottom line results perspective, is how can we accelerate the launch of new products and competitive advantage in the marketplace? So what are the technologies that we need in order to achieve our product goals or our service goals? So that's obviously a tangible. But there's another outcome that we have seen that melds very nicely with a contest environment, which is we want the world to know that we are innovative. We want the world to know that we are open. We may be a messy, complicated organization. You may not know, how do you gain entry as a startup organization? How do you bring your technology to us? So an innovation contest is a way for a highly complex organization to open their doors, to say to the world, we are innovative, we are interested, we are open, and we want to collaborate. And not only do we want to collaborate, but let me tell you about the ways or the areas that we're interested in collaborating. So a lot of times, companies say, send me your ideas, and it becomes somewhat of a suggestion box. It's really interesting, but how do you make the connection? How do you actually do active matchmaking between the goals of the organization or the gaps of a corporate organization and the technology that exists in a global innovation community? So a contest is a very, very public way of first establishing an innovation brand for an organization, telling the world specifically, we're open, we're collaborative, we want to do business with you. And here are our technology needs. Here are the specific goals that we want to achieve with these technological advances. If you have an idea or a concept or know-how or technology that matches this, now we can start a much more advanced dialogue.
Okay.
So there's this double element of creating an open open invitation to the world, and then also specifying where those areas of interest are.
Okay, so let me because I really want to delve in a bit more into the specifics of what you're talking about when it comes to this contest model, because what you're talking about is an outreach kind of thing for companies with with an innovation problem in mind and making that visible. But before we go there, I just wanted to let's say, because I'm listening to you and I'm thinking, well, if I'm a corporate innovator, it sounds a bit scary because I have this this executive sponsorship for my project or my program. It's highly visible. Doesn't seem like there's a lot of room for failure here for me as a corporate innovator with this visible animal in the room. How do you manage that?
Right. So when we think about innovation contests, we have these dual communication objectives. One is on the branding side, and one is about actually creating a connection with the innovation community. So how do we measure success in those two areas? On the branding side, innovation contests actually have a complete communications plan that is embedded in the program. So traditional media, but also social media. And so part of the metrics of an innovation contest are how well have I gotten my message out there? How well have I positioned myself with a broader community? And so we'll talk a little bit later about the Cisco Grand Challenge, which in many ways was about positioning Cisco with the open source community, which is a stakeholder group that they didn't necessarily have strong relationships with. So that branding piece is one part of the metric for measuring success. The other thing that's really interesting about an innovation contest is that when this matchmaking takes place, there's a commitment by the sponsor to make an award. And so, in fact, the outcome is the success factor is already built into the contest. Mm-hmm. In engaging in a contest, the sponsoring organization says, we will select from this pool of submissions the winners, and here's the criteria that we have for selecting winners, and we will award those winners in multiple ways. So again, the success expectations are set at the outfront, saying that, for example, we will award X amount of winners, tens of thousands of euros for the best submission. So there's a financial incentive. And then there are other incentives as well, for example, potential collaboration with the sponsoring organization. So again, the nice thing about a contest is that those commitments are made upfront, openly, in a very transparent way, so that both parties know what their commitments are and what their upside opportunities are before they engage.
So what you're basically saying is, by adding to the innovation challenge as such, let's say the award, to make it very explicit what people can actually win. There's almost like a two-edged sword that I'm hearing here. I mean, it's on one hand side is the solution providers, the ESPs that really see, hey, it's real, and it fits to what I would be interested in to work on, also from a price kind of perspective. And on the other hand, I think that's perhaps often overlooked. It has a different dynamic inside the client organization, it seems, because it's not something you can ignore anymore, because you've spent quite a substantial amount of money in some cases on awarding people for specific prototype solutions, things that you get out of this. So it seems like a double-edged sword in that sense. Okay, so that's helpful. For me, it would be interesting perhaps to understand a bit more about what it actually is. What are the elements that go into an open innovation contest? How do you structure these kind of things? So could you give us a bit of a hint about that? What goes inside a contest? What are the ingredients there?
Sure. So when we start working with a client on an innovation contest, every organization has multiple challenges. So, generally an organization will have what we call a portfolio of needs. And those needs can be very tactical, they can be highly strategic, and they may relate to new market opportunities, they may be related to relaunching a well-established brand, they may be advancing technology and being at the forefront of something new. So there are lots of different ways that companies want to engage in open innovation and creating new breakthrough technology.
So that's number one, basically. You need something, a problem, something to work on, right?
Right. And so what we do is we sit down with the organization, with the sponsoring company, and say, what is it that you really want to achieve here? Are you looking for a new design? Are you looking for a new concept? Are you looking for a new business approach? Are you looking to identify a new community of a kind of an ecosystem of expertise that you can work with on an ongoing basis? Are you looking for some kind of software or new development approach? So looking at the types of problems, identifying what the solution set might look like, not the approach, not what someone might do, but how would we measure what a successful submission would look like. And then we take a step back and we say, well, what would be really intriguing about this particular challenge to a broader community? Because again, for example, on the screen right now, the project was with General Electric, with GE, and they were looking to develop an ergonomic handle for a very, very traditional project. Okay, It's interesting. It's interesting to a design community because, again, they're looking to bring ergonomics into industrial design. But, there's not a big call to action to the world to say, we're going to have a whole new world if we have an ergonomic handle for a circuit breaker.
Right? I know what it might do.
Right. But, again, it's very interesting to a design community that's not necessarily involved with GE in design work. On the other hand, when we work on a project like we've done other work with GE related to breast cancer, they were looking for a very, very specific solution set. They were trying to deal with triple negative outcomes. So, very, very technical. But the broader messaging, that umbrella messaging, which is very interesting to any stakeholder, whether it's a consumer or a patient or the broader medical community, is what can we do? We, GE, want to make a mark towards improving prognosis and diagnosis for individuals who have breast cancer. That's my call to action. And so again, when we're looking in the contest environment, part of selecting a good project is understanding who we want to message to, who the broader community is, and how well that specific challenge adapts to a broader call to action.
Okay, so after you've understand what the need is, there's basically a discussion on objectives, what you want to achieve with the exercise, which I think drives, I guess, the design of how you organize, let's say, the contest in total, and drives what's your target audience and what kind of solutions do you want to get from them. It also drives perhaps the design of prize and award structures and things like that, I can imagine. And then I think what you're talking about is what you call a call to action, which is more the aspirational part of the challenge, right? That's and the contest that you're talking about.
Exactly. And again, we've got that dual messaging that goes out. So what is, when we're, if I have to come up with a tweet, I need a pretty concise message that's going to stimulate a broad community. So when we look at the potential needs that a client may have, we have one eye to what is the real technical challenge that we want to solve, and then what's that messaging going to look like to a broader community. I'd love to, so on the screen right now is the Cisco Security Grand Challenge, and this is a great example because, that top-line messaging, a global initiative to secure the Internet of Things, okay?
Wow.
So the Internet of Things, I'm assuming, that that's common vernacular, but the Internet of Things is the idea that the Internet will, in fact, allow us to operate and control all the things in our life. So it may be a garage door opener, it may be a security system in our house, it may be the heating system or the cooling system, but at some point it may be our automobile. Okay? So this idea of having a control pad by which you can drive to work. And so when we think about that, security is a huge issue, okay? And that's something I can connect to. I'm not necessarily a developer. I know I'm not a developer. But I understand the relevance of security if we're moving into a world of the Internet of Things. And so that's a great call to action. Now, for the development community specifically, we parse that message much more closely, much more specific in terms of what are we looking for, what does a good submission look like, what kinds of application markets are we looking for. So again, you see that dual messaging of a technical call with specifications to guide successful proposals from the solution community, and then the second piece being, why should I care? Why would anybody who's ever heard of Cisco be interested that they're doing this? So this one's a great example because it creates that dual messaging very elegantly.
Okay, so and the dual messaging is always this combination of PR marketing with an aspirational element, and then on the other hand, it's the technical, the actual detailed question that you're asking. Why is it so important to have this detailed question in there? Why isn't it enough just to have an aspirational question in there just to get the whole world engaged? I mean, what's wrong with that?
Sure. So actually, we have a lot of clients who have attempted to do contests or grand challenges on their own, only with the aspirational messaging, and they end up with thousands of, I'll go back to that suggestion box.
Okay.
Thousands of nice ideas that aren't executable in any way. So again, by crafting a technical request that has specifications, that outlines what a successful proposal looks like, that delineates what kinds of expertise the organization is looking for. Now, when you create an innovation contest, you receive dozens, maybe 100 submissions, but 100% of those represent partners who Cisco can truly engage with and who represent who they can actually engage with to execute against the outcome. So I'm going to go back to that idea of IP. If I tell you I'm looking for anybody to tell me what cool things I could do to secure the world, I as a layman could have a cool idea, write it on the back of my napkin, and send it in. Okay. Well, it may be an idea that Cisco's already thought of, and they have the know-how to execute against it, and I don't. And later I'm going to say, that was my idea, and they didn't pick me. They just took my idea and they ran with it. And so again, by being way more specific and by engaging a community of true solvers, you now allow people to maintain their right to their true intellectual property and to contribute know-how as a partner in the solving process. And so it allows the solver to personally and financially benefit from this collaboration as compared to, a reach out into the world for ideas anywhere where it's much more difficult to actually partner with the person who has that ideation.
Sure. Sure. So, are all problems good for innovation contest, Denise? Can you do anything with an innovation contest? Is the tool that you can use for anything?
One of the questions we start with is when we look at a client's portfolio of needs, we say, well, what would a successful solution look like? So the solution, a submission, has to be something that where an individual can demonstrate expertise or concept without actually providing their IP. We don't want anyone to submit confidential information. Okay? We want the individual to be able to demonstrate know-how or capability, but not to give away their know-how in any way. So it has to be something that somebody can actually solve and represent their know-how. And then the other piece of it is what we have to be able to box in the submission in a way that we can reward the person fairly with fair compensation. So if I come forward and I say, I have, for example, we're working on a desalination project right now. And, if I have a grand concept for desalinating water and I only want to give you $10,000 for that, or 10,000 euro for that concept, that probably wouldn't be a fair exchange. So I really want to ask for something a little bit more narrow so that when I give you, when my award is 50,000 euro or 100,000 euro, there's a much more fair compensation model in place. So a lot of times the challenge itself is selected because the community can represent themselves well through a submission process.
Okay. So the people that are responding, Denise, perhaps that's helpful to create some insight there, because when you're talking about 100,000 euros, that's an enormous amount of money, even for a corporation. And I remember that GE was handing out $300,000 to winners for let's say that was hopefully a bit more than an idea. What kind of organizations or people are responding to those questions?
So the challenge that you're referencing is the Head Health Challenge, and the sponsors were GE, the NFL, and UnderArmour. So NFL is the National Football League, again, so an athletic organization, and UnderArmour being a manufacturer of high-performance athletic equipment. And so those three organizations came together to look at improving diagnosis and prognosis for mild traumatic brain injury, so concussion. And again, all three of those organizations are stakeholders in improving the safety and health of athletes. And so they had two $10 million grand challenges in which they were looking for, in the first case, better diagnosis. So the organizations that received, for example, $300,000 awards were in many cases large academic institutions that were doing research around scanning technology and also understanding the visual imaging of the brain. So if you think about a $300,000 pool of funding, more similar to, for example, a grant where it would allow them to continue the research that they're already working on. So academic institutions that are doing research are a large, is a portion of our solution provider community. And then it could be on the corporate or the not-for-profit side, it could be startups, it could be small to medium-sized organizations, it could even be large corporations, as I said, that have IP that they're not currently using.
Okay. So what I'm hearing in terms of let's say organizations, because we've been talking about, let's say, almost individuals, like the community that Cisco was targeting, and you've been talking about large research institutes and academic institutions. That's different. I guess that's completely different audiences and different ball games in terms of price structure, award structure, outreach, and these kind of things. if I'm a client and I'm thinking about something like this, how do I get started? Because it sounds there are a lot of things that need to come together, right, on these on programs.
Right. So first, in order to, a lot of organizations, as I said, have this portfolio of needs that they have.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to be engaged in the contest environment, the organization has to be comfortable being public. So if I have a need and I'm looking to get into a white space and I don't want anybody to know I'm in the white space, a contest is probably not a good idea. However, it is no surprise to anybody in the world that Cisco is looking at security issues related to the Internet of Things. And in fact, in this case, they specifically wanted to send a message to open software developers that they wanted to establish collaboration with that community. And so a contest was a great way to create that relationship, to initiate that relationship with a community that they weren't previously engaged with, and to give them a project to work on together. So again, they wanted to be public. They wanted the world to know that they were playing in this space. They're looking at really leading edge technology about to create security around a technology that isn't even necessarily in the world yet. So they were very intentional in wanting to position their organization at being at the leading edge. So that desire to be public is a really important component of the contest, selecting a contest and getting started. The other thing a company needs to think about is, what am I looking for, and how big a prize am I interested in compensating? So a lot of times companies come forward and they say, I don't have $10 million, I can't do a contest. If you look at the contests that we do, a lot of times the prize pool is a couple $100,000, and maybe there are 3 winners. When there's a $10 million contest, there are 20 winners. So again, the prize pool isn't $10 million for one winner. The prize pool is generally segmented amongst multiple winners. So there's all different sizes.
Okay. So I'm looking at the time, and out of respect for everybody joining in, we usually schedule about half an hour for these kind of brief update sessions and practitioner sessions. Perhaps it would be interesting to close off with one of the other examples, Denys, of one of the contests. One of the 3D might be interesting, because I think there was a bit of a different approach than the others, as it was first a capability kind of thing. Could you share a bit of that?
Sure. So it's no surprise, again, that GE is very active in developing their 3D printing capabilities. So additive manufacturing has applications across a huge, almost any area. So it could be, in building an airplane, you could use additive manufacturing in medical equipment. So again, 3D printing is a huge growth area for any organization. Like, no surprise, GE wanted to be open in that space. And specifically in this case, they were looking to use new types of materials in 3D printing. And they did not know who in the world truly in the entire world, had the capability to work with these new kinds of materials. And so they had 2 goals in this 3D printing quest. The first goal was to create an ecosystem of potential partners who they could work with during the challenge, but actually into the future to, again, no matter what kind of application they were looking at, who has the expertise in the world to work with unique materials in additive manufacturing. So the first phase of the challenge was individuals coming forward and essentially presenting their capabilities against the specific criteria that GE outlined. And there were 10 respondents who each received $5,000. So again, not a ton of money, but essentially it was a recognition of their know-how. The real upside potential was the winners then had the opportunity to participate in phase 2. And in phase 2, they conducted really an apples-to-apples comparison. They provided each of the winners with the same specification, with the same material, with drawings, and they asked each of those organizations to come back with a test coupon, a prototype of a fictitious piece, so that they could actually compare the manufacturing capability of each of the winners against each other against a fixed outcome. Mm-hmm. And so from that group, there were a smaller group who were actually selected as the winners, who received a next level of funding, but who now actually are collaborative partners. They've actually been kind of vetted as partners with this capability to work with GE in specific business applications. So the idea of having a contest achieve 2 goals in a phased way. The first goal is tell me who you are and tell me what you're good at, and awarding those organizations by saying you're best in class. And then the second is having those organizations be able to create a prototype where their capabilities can be evaluated against each other so that GE can truly identify which ones would be the best collaborative partners. So from GE's point of view, it was a way to reach out into the world, tell the world they were looking for expertise, to truly accelerate the selection of potential partners way faster than any kind of, if they had gone traditional supply chain routes, this would have taken forever. And they knew that they didn't have any of these types of partners within their traditional supply chain. Okay. From the solution provider point of view, how do I get in front of GE? And how did I even know that they were looking for this? So it was really a win-win from both sides.
All right, excellent. That's very insightful. So what I would like to do, Denys, is go to a number of questions because we have a Q&A open. I got a lot of questions coming in. So let me start with, and I'm trying to group a few questions because some of them are along the same lines, because I have some questions which are around how does my company initiate an innovation contest for a defined problem? And then another question in line with this one is how do I start innovation contests with NineSigma? So what do we usually do when we start with a company? That's perhaps the consolidated question.
Sure. So what we do in the first step is we have a dialogue with the organization, have an idea of, what do you really want to achieve? What are the needs that you're thinking about working on? We talk a little bit about prize strategy, but again, it's not all about the money up front. Are there a lot of times an organization, a contest, a lot of times there's benefit in launching a contest with an event. So for example, is there a conference or is there some kind of endpoint that you're focusing on that you want this to be the centerpiece of? So a lot of times that there are a company will come forward and they say, we're sponsoring a conference. We'd love to launch a contest at that conference. So what are the timelines or events that are in place that you're interested in targeting? And then what does a successful outcome look like for your organization? So we go through that very top-level scoping process to validate that there is interest and that there's benefit for your organization in doing a contest. Then we put together a proposal in order to frame the work together, and generally the work starts with a kickoff with that executive team. So again, we're looking for a cross-functional executive team. A lot of times there's executive sponsorship, but we also need to make sure that R&D, marketing, and legal are all represented in that planning or leadership team.
Okay. So it's a very much a cross-discipline team from the client side that needs to be, let's say, involved to cover the different aspects of a contest to let's say ensure upfront that everything is basically covered and taken care of. That's what I'm hearing you say.
Exactly.
A lot of the work is before you actually go outside, before you're able to, because that's I guess the execution is let's say the downhill travel, which is you let go of the brakes and it goes.
That's a really important point, Rick. When we look at a timeline for a contest, for example, it usually takes about 3 months to do the design and the setup. So going from the concept all the way through to the point of launch. Yeah. Once we're at launch, everything goes on automatic pilot. So all the work is done up front. So for example, one thing that people are surprised about is that before we launch a challenge, we work with the client to come up with the evaluation criteria. How are you going to evaluate submissions once the challenge closes? And a lot of times people say, well, why do I need to worry about now? We haven't even launched yet.
I don't even know what the outcome is. Yeah.
And I'll know it when I see it. That's my favorite answer. And the important thing is that we need to make sure that the evaluation process matches the criteria, the guiding criteria that we are giving the solution provider community. Because if you ask them to perform in one way and then evaluate them by totally different criteria, there's a mismatch. So we actually work with the client to create an evaluation process before the challenge even launches so that the criteria and the evaluation match up.
Okay, so just to summarize for the people who asked the question, so to get started and to basically understand what's needed, we basically do a scoping session, Denys, right? Which is basically to learn what the objectives are, what kind of money outlay is being considered, and to balance it between what they're looking for and what's realistic, I guess, in terms of what you want to achieve. And perhaps to build on that is a question which is a bit related, I guess, to the question that I asked as a follow-up, which is, what are the implied responsibilities and costs incurred if an innovation contest is proposed? People want to understand what am I getting myself involved in terms of money outlay, and that would be an interesting one.
Right. So let's talk first about what are the resources that are important for an organization to participate. I referenced a leadership team, so again, there'll be individuals who are part of an executive leadership team that represent R&D, marketing, and communications, depending whether those are one and the same, and legal, because again, there's always terms and conditions that are related to one of these challenges. Those individuals, and generally we're looking for a sponsor or a coordinator who brings the client team together. We have teams that work with each one of those groups. So for example, there'll be a communications group who puts together a communications team and works with NineSigma's communications team. Our technical teams work with the client's technical R&D group in order to fashion the need, to articulate the need, to establish what the criteria are going to be and the evaluation process. And then we work with legal to establish terms and conditions. A lot of the work in terms of time comes in that first 3 months, 2 to 3 months, when we're designing the challenge. And then things go quiet. So the time that the challenge is open, 3 to 4 months the challenge is open, that's when NineSigma is doing all the work of engaging the community directly. And our client, there's a respite during that time. When the challenge closes, then we package up all of the proposals, bring them to the client, and then the client again, primarily the R&D or the evaluation group, is highly engaged in sorting through, vetting, and selecting the winners. And so there's generally a 8 to 12-week time frame at the close where the evaluation teams are highly engaged in selecting the winners. And so it's important for the sponsoring organization to have the expertise or have access to the expertise to make those selections. When we talk about costs related to contests generally, again, you need to think a little bit about having a prize pool. So prize pools can be maybe 100,000 from on the low end, and can go. We have a grand challenge now that has a $35 million prize, 35 million Canadian dollar prize pool that's being allocated over 5 years. So it's a multi-phase program, and again, it's over a very long time frame. So it's great to be able to say, oh, it's a $35 million prize, but if you look at it, it's parsed out into pieces.
Okay, excellent, Denise. Thank you very much. So thank you for all the insights. Thank you, everybody, for joining the webinar and for being in the webinar with us. 2 reminders. This is a series of webinars, so there will be a follow-up webinar that will launch in January. We will contact everybody again with that webinar. Then one thing that I would like to point out is Denys has written a very, very, very comprehensive white paper where a lot of information, more than what we were able to share in this 45 minutes, is consolidated with a lot of details on how things are organized, some practical examples. You can find those on our website. The people that have attended the webinar will send you the link, or we'll send you the paper so that you have the white paper. So again, thank you very much, and looking forward to see you next time. Denys, have a great day and a great start of the day. All right.
Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.